Uh, Welcome to Fundraising Fridays. And this is Progressive Multiplier's presentation of revenue succession planning, security in times of change. And we are so glad that you are joining us today. First, I want to offer deep appreciation to the Resilience Initiative for making this partnership possible. And we bring these fundraising Fridays to you with their support. We've got our dream jobs coming in right here. Oh, professional world traveler. Yeah, that sounds about right as well. Love that. Working outside in nature. You're in California. That's perfect for that, Dharma. That's a great name, by the way, Dharma. Love that name. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Lucy Brandon, and I am the Director of Independent Revenue Generation, Strategy and Innovation. That's quite a mouthful here at Progressive Multiplier. And my dream job is actually a stunt car driver by day and a DJ by night. So that's me. And this is the rest of our team right up here on the screen. And for those of you who are in the room with us, if you'd like to introduce yourselves. Sabrina?
Yeah, I'll go. Hi, everyone. My name is Sabrina Orozco. I use she, her pronouns. I am also located in California, and I am the other director of IRG Strategy and Innovation here at Progressive Multiplier. I'll pass it on to Janet.
Hello, everybody. My name is Janet Davison, and she, her pronouns, and I am the Chief of Staff here at Progressive Multiplier. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Janet. Well, in case some of you are new to our fundraising Fridays and are not familiar with Progressive Multiplier, our vision here is a progressive movement with the scale to power, achieve justice, realize democracy, and restore the environment. We believe that money multiplied is change amplified. So we help progressive movement groups like yourselves achieve sustainability and scalability by strengthening their catalytic revenue generation capacities and diversifying their financial capital. Next slide, Janet. So along with these fundraising Fridays, our monthly trainings, our partnership with Resilience Initiative also offers up to 5 free hours of one-on-one coaching with our team of fundraising experts. Maybe you need assistance creating a communications calendar to engage your donors, or you want to know the best practices for setting up a major donor fundraising program. Maybe you want to teach your board how to fundraise. Our team at Progressive Multiplier is here to help you with the resources, knowledge, and tools you need to grow and diversify your fundraising efforts. If you're interested in these free coaching sessions, please reach out to Michelle Mengel at resilience.org. All right, well, let's dive into today's topic, what the learning objectives are for today. Today, we are going to define what revenue succession planning is. We're going to understand why revenue succession planning is necessary, and we will learn how to use the tools provided to help your organization build a revenue succession plan of its own. Next slide, Janet. So what is revenue succession planning? And how does it differ from other succession planning? Well, revenue succession planning is risk mitigation. It is a plan for ensuring the continuity of your funding and income streams in the event of a staff departure. While all succession plans addresses how to create steadying conditions through a transition, revenue succession planning helps you understand the funding consequences of staffing changes and addresses transitions of all levels of revenue responsibility. Does anyone want to take a guess at what the average tenure of a fundraiser is? Just drop it in the chat or come off mute. 3 years, 1 year? Well, it's actually 18 months, 5 years. My goodness, Rose, that was very, that was a great guess right there, 5 years. No, 18 months, 18 months. So we developed this training because we've seen organizations stumble unnecessarily when there's turnover in the chain of revenue work. People leave jobs all the time, and development staff are no different. But when revenue-related staff leave with or without notice, your systems and knowledge that directly impacts your organization's revenue might go out the door with them. Would you know what to do to keep your revenue program moving forward if your only fundraiser who held all the major donor relationships left your organization? What about the person who runs the social media accounts or the special events program? Perhaps you've worked for or heard of an organization whose ED announced their retirement and the funders decided on a wait and see approach for future funding. Even 6 months of funding can torpedo your work, and all because funders only had a relationship with just one person at your organization. Not having a plan can cost you not only revenue, but other resources like staff time trying to figure out how to get back into social media accounts. Has anyone here had any experiences similar to this, where somebody on the development staff has left and just left a whole trail of chaos behind them because they didn't know what to do? Has anyone had that kind of experience?
This is Dharma Galang. Well, it took a while from my predecessor, from the time that my predecessor left to when I came on board. It was like, I think, over a year. So yeah, it was a difficult time for the organization because other people had to kind of take on various parts of this role for development.
Right. Thank you, Dharma. So let's get an idea of where you all are in your revenue succession. Does your organization have a formal revenue succession plan for all development roles, not just development director and ED? So just drop the numbers in the chat. 1, yes, we have a detailed and up-to-date plan. 2, yes, but it's outdated or needs refinement. 3, no, but we're planning to develop one. Or 4, no, we haven't considered it. Let's just see where everyone is. All right, we've got a lot of 3s and 4s here. Well, that's great. That's why you're here today. And we've got you. We've got you. We're going to teach you some tips and tricks to get this plan going. But you may be wondering why I specified all development roles and not just the higher level positions like development director, ED, program officers. Well, that's because there are no small roles in development, and every role needs a succession plan. Let's take, for example, our fictional case study of a small progressive organization. They're called United Together for Unity Forever. And their development associate wins the Mega Millions jackpot, woo, and leaves suddenly, and leaving the development director on their own. Well, it was just an entry-level position, so it shouldn't be so much of a big deal, right? Well, not so fast. Because the development the development associate was solely responsible for running the weekly gift report and manually creating the mail merge letters once a week, a small and almost invisible task that was taken for granted, the development director did not notice that the letters hadn't gone out for a few months while they rehired for the new person. This lack of communication left donors feeling unappreciated and perhaps causing a brand new donor to feel inclined not to donate again because they didn't receive any kind of acknowledgement, or a long-term donor who made an unexpected sizable gift but received no acknowledgement and left feeling uncertain that their gift made the difference that they'd intended. Next, oh yeah, we go. The development associate also created and managed all the social media accounts and prospecting databases, and all the passwords were under their name, effectively locking out the organization until everything was reset. And if anyone has tried to get back into an organization's social media account without the password, you know how frustrating and laborious that can be. Next slide, Janet. The development associate also managed up to the development director, ensuring that deadlines for grants, reporting, and funder stewardship were met. With them gone, the director of development missed an important reporting deadline and put the organization's largest grant renewal in jeopardy. While you can see there are no small roles when it comes to an organization's revenue, there are certainly overlooked labor and knowledge and expertise. And that is why we develop this training to save you from this living nightmare. So what are the benefits of effective planning? When you effectively plan for revenue succession, you have a clear understanding of the ongoing work, the goals, and the personnel allocation that allows you to prioritize your highest efficiency revenue options in the event of limited bandwidth. Setting up systems can help you protect your funding streams while you regroup after a staff departure. Do you know what you would do if your annual fund manager left a month before your year-end campaign? Given your sudden limited bandwidth, would you be able to complete that project? Or would you focus on bigger asks from other revenue sources instead? If you plan, you won't be flying blind if your database administrator decides to trade pulling reports for pulling weeds on their own farm in Vermont. And you won't be lost about what relationships your executive director holds when they give notice they're about to begin astronaut training camp. All right, let's do a quick quiz. And again, just drop the answer in the chat. True or false? Revenue succession planning helps you to prioritize top fundraising goals and allocate resources efficiently, especially when bandwidth is limited. Is that true or false? Just drop the answer in the chat. Yes, correct. That is true. When you plan for revenue succession, you will have a clear understanding of your fundraising goals and available resources and know where to prioritize during the staff shift. Well done. And another quick one. A revenue succession plan should only focus on what to do when a senior level position, such as development director or executive director, leaves the organization. Is that true or false? Well done. Nice job, guys. That is false. Every role that has a role in development needs needs to be included in the succession plan, the revenue succession plan. Okay, so now we're going to prepare for change. What kind of change should you expect? When planning for revenue succession, there are two types of change to take into consideration: expected and emergent. Expected changes usually give you an opportunity to plan. For example, when a leader departs with several months of notice, you have time to plan and train for a replacement. Emergent changes are unexpected and sudden, like no notice departures or an employee suddenly runs off to join the circus. Planning now before you hit either expected or emergent changes will prepare your organization to handle anything thrown your way. When you identify your risks, procedures, and contingencies now, it will make for smoother transitions and help to mitigate the financial losses. And we're about to go through all the tools and guidance that we've developed for you to be prepared for when somebody does leave. Don't wait on the stuff that you can do now to ensure the smoother transitions. So leaders appear at all levels of your business plan, from the executive team to the development coordinator. Somebody is leading every portion of the work. And that person may be the only person who really understands how it's done. When you know what gaps will be left behind in the event of a departure, you will have the chance to build in redundancies that you can put into play immediately. And remember, you need a plan for when the development associate leaves with all the mail-murder knowledge just as much as you need a plan for when your ED or development director leaves. Because after all, timely thank you letters and tax receipts drive the revenue too. But wait a minute, redundancies, aren't they bad? While conventional corporate wisdom will have you believing that redundancy in your organization is an inefficient and bad thing and you should cut the waste, it's not universally true. For instance, in engineering, redundancy is a design principle that involves duplicating critical components or functions of a system to increase reliability or improve performance. The goal is to ensure that a system can continue to function even if one or more components fail. In our context, redundancy is a critical component of revenue succession planning. Determining the right amount of redundancy is directly tied to the level of risk a departure can present to the revenue. Okay, so here we have on the screen a house of cards and a Jenga tower. The house of cards is flimsy and will fall if you pull just one card or even breathe too heavily near it. On the other hand, a Jenga tower still stands if you remove multiple blocks. By developing business redundancies in your organization, you are making sure that it all doesn't come tumbling down when a single person leaves. So based on the information that you've heard so far, if you were to choose one of these to represent your organization's resiliency, which would you choose? Is your house, are you the house of cards? Or are you the Jenga tower? Drop one in the chat for cards or two in the chat for Jenga. Which one do you think your relationship, your organization is when it comes to resiliency? Jenga tower. Good job, Dharma. Nice one. You're really tall, shaky Jenga tower. All right, all right. So we've got some organizations in some different positions right now. All right, well, let's move on to how to build your revenue succession planning. What can you do to plan for these emergent, slide 24, Janet. There we go. What can we do to plan for these emergent and expected changes? Because you will encounter one of these changes sooner or later. So there are two phases in the revenue succession planning, the proactive phase and the reactive phase. The proactive phase is what you can do now before a departure is announced. And the good news is there is a lot that you can do in this phase to be prepared. And then there is the reactive phase. And this is how to put the plan into action once a departure has been announced. Knowing how to implement these two phases are necessary to avoid the revenue bust when the beautiful house of cards you've so carefully built catches a gust of wind and takes your revenue with it. So let's get to it. The proactive phase. This is what we do now to avoid the revenue bust. In this section, we're going to talk about cultivating relationship redundancy, developing your revenue project inventory, building a functional revenue budget, and reviewing the contingency resources. And don't worry if you don't want any of these means, we are going to show you all these templates very soon, so this will all fall into place. Excuse me. Developing relationship redundancy. Major relationships that impact revenue should never depend on just one person. If your major gifts officer won big in Vegas over the weekend and quit on Monday morning, who else in your organization are your major donors connected with? If your grant manager quits, would your foundation program officers know who to contact to get a report or a proposal? Developing relationship redundancy is a critical component of revenue succession planning. Your major revenue relationships are too important to be held by only one person. Every donor or funder relationship must be held by at least two staff members, one primary and one secondary relationship manager. Both should be up to date on all facets of the relationship. Both should have cultivated reliability and trust with the donor or funder, and both should be able to pick up a call or a meeting at a moment's notice. If major donors know that they can always get a hold of someone that they trust at your organization, they'll be less likely to stop giving when their primary contact leaves. If a funder knows you have a leaderful organization and they know who to call when they can't reach their primary contact, they know you're in good hands in the event of a staff shift. So how do you develop relationship redundancies? Well, you introduce the secondary relationship manager as a trusted partner to both the primary contact and the funder as soon as possible. You copy the secondary on all important outreach. You bring the secondary into contact with the donor frequently. The primary and secondary should review cases together regularly to share knowledge. And when the primary is unavailable for a call, the secondary should be ready and able to pick up the meetings in their absence. Also consider bringing on a board member to some of the more important or tenuous relationships as a third, contact. And another important fundraiser relationship redundancy to incorporate into your plans is ensuring that you have a primary and secondary contact at foundations so that you have somebody else that you can contact should their primary at the foundation, let's say, for instance, their program officer leaves, you still have a secondary contact that you can always get in contact with. All right, some tools for your use. In a moment, you're going to see our revenue project inventory templates. The first template you'll see is the current revenue project. Here is where you'll be focusing on your project plans and status, what the goals of each revenue are, what the revenue sources the project relies upon, and who the internal leads are. This is where you will take stock of who your stakeholders and knowledge holders are. What documents do you have or need for continuity of the work? Think of such documents as passwords, login credentials, addresses of your grant portals, vendor names, and other relevant information. Okay, so here on our screen, you can see our sample current revenue project inventory. You can see all of the grants and the campaigns laid out with the goals, the due dates, the project leads, and all the linked documents. And don't worry, you will all be receiving all these downloadable templates in an email after. So you'll be able to look at these and play around with them and begin to make them your own. So anyone looking at this document can get a snapshot of what this organization is doing right now, when it's due, who is responsible, and you can find all the relevant materials. Be sure to make a note of any restrictions that come with the grant. Is it for program use only? Can it be spent in only the second half of the next calendar year? Be sure to include all those notes in this document right here. List everyone responsible for each project and all the knowledge holders. You can paste a link to all the key documents, the collateral designs, contracts, and other relevant documents. Be sure you've listed reporting deadlines next to each project. And then review this monthly to make sure it is up to date because things change frequently. As revenue projects shift frequently, this should be a dynamic document that captures the current state of your revenue picture. The second phase, or the second area of focus, is your planned projects. This is a place to list out any revenue ideas that you are expecting to launch but are not yet underway. Do you have a big anniversary gala coming up the following year? Will you be launching a capital campaign? Or do you have plans to open your online merchandise center 8 months from now? This inventory will help you to know who the key personnel running the prospecting for these products, what the launch and timelines are, and of course, how much revenue a planned project is designed to generate. So on the second tab of the template, this is where we have the planned revenue projects. It's the same layout as the current project, but here you'll be making an inventory of all the planned projects that are not yet underway. And again, don't forget to include all the projected launch dates so you know when the deadlines are. This will be handy when you get to the punch list, which we'll get to in just a little while. Okay, so we've made an inventory of all the things that are currently going on and all the things that we have planned. Next, we're going to move on to building a functional revenue budget. While your organization already has a budget, an organizational budget for the entirety of business, we're going to focus here on a functional revenue budget. And it's not as complex as your typical overarching budget, but it does get very specific about your revenue picture. This is where you'll capture key elements of your revenue picture. What are the sources of revenue? What are the amounts of revenue in play and the estimated dates of realization for the revenue? And very importantly, what is at risk if someone leaves? Do you know what money or relationships are at risk if your executive director leaves? What about the revenue risks if your event manager leaves and they don't leave behind a clear list of sponsors? Again, review this every few months to make sure it's up to date and you have the right information in case the unexpected happens. And on the next slide, you will see our sample. Again, this is our functional budget revenue template. With it, you can see that we've identified all the key revenue sources, who is responsible for managing the relationships with those sources, and what the risk is, while also being able to see how much money is at play. Be sure to identify who is holding every relationship. And this is where you'll begin adding in your secondary relationship manager into this document. This is the time to put that redundancy plan into action. Next slide, Janet. As a companion to the revenue budget, we also, yes?
You have a question from Ashley. How are you defining risk?
We'll get to this in just one second, but this is determining, you'll be able to see where all your revenue is coming, who is responsible for it. So should that person leave, that revenue is at risk. So you'll see it a little bit clearer in just 1 minute. But thank you for that question. Expenses. So we're going to do the same thing in the functional budget, but this time with your expenses. And this is to help you see when your major major expenses are expected. Then you can compare to the revenue projects to identify any places where the revenue and expenses are misaligned. And you can see that crucial projects may not be achievable given your funding risks. All right, so evaluating a risk scenario. We just covered a functional revenue budget that will help you see visually where you have significant risk in the event of a staff change. What is at risk when someone leaves, and whose departure would put your funding at risk the most? So let's go back to our fictional organization, United Together for Unity Forever, and look at their functional revenue budget. Where do we have the highest risk? Whose departure puts us at the most risk? So if we see, we have Karen's name here a lot. She is covering individual donations. She's covering corporate donations, in-kind donations, government grants, foundation grants. Her name is all over the place. Jose has been added here as a secondary to 2 of her foundation grants right here. But it looks like she is responsible for a good chunk of this $250,000 revenue budget right here. So Karen holding all of these relationships and being the only person responsible for these relationships is putting the entire organization, if she leaves, putting the organization at risk if she leaves. So if she leaves, the government grants and the individual donations are at risk. And that is a total of $195,000. Nearly 80% of their revenue is at risk if just one person leaves. So this organization could severely stumble if Karen left. So what should they do? What should the organization do to mitigate the risk of Karen leaving? So again, let's just throw some answers in the chat. What do you think the organization should do to mitigate the risk? Should they throw Karen a pizza party to show how much they appreciate her and hope that she doesn't leave? Should they hire somebody new to relieve the load from Karen? Or should they establish Jose as a secondary relationship manager to more of those relationships to build relationship redundancy? What do you all think? Pizza party, A, hire someone new, B, or establish Jose as more of a secondary relationship manager, C? All right, we got lots of C's coming in the chat. I still don't understand how the risk is determined. Is that sort of the likelihood of regifts? Okay, I'm not sure if I understand your question there. Do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, I guess just going back, like what makes foundation gifts low risk, government gifts, high risk, and individual donations, medium? Is it, yeah, because when I look at that, what I would think is like our individual donors are pretty consistent. That's why we have a good likelihood of retaining them. That's why they are medium risk. Government is less predictable, so that's why it's high risk. Is that
Sure.
correct?
Sure. So in this instance, we're talking about the fact that Karen is the only person who is in charge of all the individual donations, all the corporate donations, and most of the foundation grants. So if Karen left suddenly tomorrow, there is nobody to oversee all of those donations, all of the individual donations, most of the government grants, all of the corporate donations. There is no one to cover that at all. So that is where the risk is, because you no longer have anybody overseeing those revenue sources. That revenue is now at risk. So it doesn't really matter how loyal or how long a donor or a funder has been with you. If your main primary contact for those donors or that foundation suddenly leaves and you no longer have somebody to take those questions or whatever it is, that is when your revenue is at risk. Does that make more sense?
And I think what I can do, if you don't mind, Lucy, me stepping in and adding a little bit more here. And I think, like, let's focus on the government grants. So Karen is working on the individual donations and corporate donations and in-kind contributions. We've labeled those as medium risk because we know that Jose probably has an in to this work and could hold it. We know that the individual donors are established, so we have systems that can help keep those going in this time. Sorry, I'm having puppy issues. But the government grants, when you look at the complexity of like what is needed to work on those, the relations, the reporting requirements, the financial needs on it, those are high risk. Who has the capacity and the knowledge of of what is needed for those to carry that on? So that's why we've listed the government grants specifically here as high risk, if that makes sense. Does that help clarify that and put that more into perspective?
Yes, that's helpful. I think that it would be helpful if you could capture some of that in this, like monitoring and evaluation needs high, or something like existing systems high, something like that, that would help sort of explain. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Karen. So yes, we are going to establish Jose as a secondary manager to build relationship redundancy. And that is how we're going to mitigate the risk of Karen leaving. Okay, so now we're going to review our contingency resources. You need to know what you have and who has what. What SOPs do you have? What do you need to build? You need to ensure that all SOPs are very granular, as if you're teaching someone who has never touched anything in your organization. We don't use acronyms. We don't use shorthand. We write everything out so that somebody walking into this who's never had anything to do with our work will be able to follow your SOPs step by step. There are lots of visual aids, things like Tango, that can help you illustrate click by click if you want to develop these SOPs in a more visual manner. There's lots of tools out there that can help you with that. And then cross-training. Next slide, Janet. Are your staff cross-trained? Data management, primary and backup owners, donor management. Everyone well, not everyone, but so some jobs do certainly need to have some kind of backup, some kind of cross-training, especially with your data management and your donor management personnel as well. We already know what it takes. We already know that you've taken the time to build in relationship redundancy, but what happens when your database manager needs to take urgent family leave to take care of a loved one for a few weeks? Is there anyone else in your organization who can run the reports? Do you have more than one person who can build and send your donor engagement emails in MailChimp? How can you build cross-functional knowledge that cross-pollinate the work to multiple people? And then there's professional development. Do you leverage professional development opportunities to share and spread the knowledge? Do you give your development associate the opportunity to take that project management certification or the Blackboard Raiser's Edge competency certifications? Are there opportunities for staff to sit with each other and learn from one another? So we have a quick guide right here that you can use to engage your team in thinking about all of your systems, processes, and staffing, and find solutions to unnecessary risk. Have this conversation, have a proactive conversation with your team about all your contingency resources. For the systems and processes, what SOPs do you have? What do you still need to create? Can you give this SOP to a new staff member and they'll be able to follow the steps? Do you need any aides to complement the SOPs? On the staffing side, who are the primary owners of the relationship? Who in your staff can you begin introducing as secondary? And begin thinking about how you can build cross-functional teams. All right, another quick quiz. Again, let's just drop the answers in the chat. Which of the tools we just discussed will give you a snapshot of what your organization is doing right now, when it is due, and who is responsible and can find all the relevant information? Is it A, the functional revenue budget? Is it B, the planned revenue budget? Sorry, planned revenue project inventory? Or C, current revenue project inventory? Drop your answers in the chat. Which of those tools will give you a snapshot of what your organization is doing right now? All right, yes, C, that is the correct answer. That is the current revenue project. You'll be able to see everything, and a person new to the organization will be able to look at that document and see exactly what is going on, who's responsible for what, when it's due, and we'll be able to easily find all the related documents. Okay, so we've covered all of the proactive arrangements. You're all prepared. And then your ED announces they're leaving to start their own true crime podcast. Fire is happening. What do we do now? This is when we put all of our work into action. Now that you've done all the steps, we now enter into the reactive phase. And this is where you'll need to trigger a set of actions in the event of the departure. And this is when we develop the transition punch list, which you'll see in just one moment. This punch list will help you identify what your action steps are, who needs to be communicated with, by whom about this departure, what the board's priorities and assignments are, and what the revenue coverage priorities and who will be responsible for each of them. So here's our sample punch list, the transition punch list. We have listed the various business areas that you may have in your organization, from the executive team to the board, development and comms teams, and there's room to add others as your organization requires it. You can take items out as easily as you can add things in. You'll want to tailor this list according to the nature of the role that is being vacated. For example, your donor relations associate's departure may not require a communications plan, but it will probably require key stakeholders to review the donor relations plan. But somebody like your executive director or development director will need some kind of communications plan. So you make this, like I say, you will tailor this list according to the role that is being vacated. You can add in all of your different activities. Be sure to identify how to cover various revenue projects, including deadlines. This isn't a comprehensive list we have up here in our sample, but this is just a jumping off point for you to begin thinking about what it is that your organization has and what it needs. But again, this is your running to-do list that you create and consult in the event of a departure. Okay, so a checklist to recap everything. The proactive phase. This is the phase that you can do the most to make staff transitions as smooth as possible. This phase is the time to create your relationship redundancies, to develop your revenue project inventories, to build a functional budget, and to review your contingency resources. And when you are finally inevitably tossed into the reactive phase, you'll be ready to have your punch list to help you take action to protect your revenue. Again, at the end of the, or after this call, we will be sending you out a link with the video and the slide deck and all the tools that we just showed you that you're more than happy, more than welcome to share with the rest of your staff, and begin these conversations, really having these frank conversations about what you would do in the event of various staff departures and getting yourself prepared. We're going to get to questions in just a minute, but I forgot to mention this at the very beginning, but Janet is going to drop a link to a survey in the chat. Please be sure to take a minute to complete this survey. This really helps us understand what fundraising professionals like yourselves are looking for in these trainings. So please take a minute to fill that out. All right, so if anyone wants to come off of mute or share questions in the chat, we can do that.
I also wanted to see if anyone here is thinking about this. What brought you to this? Like, what are you guys thinking of when you're looking at your revenue succession plan? Is this that you're looking back and looking to fill gaps? We're seeing this now, we're kind of getting into a more difficult period for a lot of our progressive groups. We might be seeing turnover. So I just kind of wanted to see how you all are in your landscape and what you guys are thinking and how you might be applying some of it to what you're doing now.
I can share. So we've had we had our longtime development director leave recently. And so we are bringing in a new director. And so I was thinking it would be a good opportunity to reevaluate as we onboard this new person, to sort of build some of these systems in, notice where, if anywhere, we're having any difficulty with the departure that we've just had. And then the other thing I'm thinking about as well is the role of the executive director. So I don't anticipate her leaving. Who knows? But more just as the organization grows and we build up the development team, thinking about kind of a transition without departure, but sort of transitioning some of the relationships that she's holding to the development staff, to sort of free up her time for other things. So that's kind of what brought me here today.
I do want to call out that that's like a good thing to think about because Lucy talked about a secondary relationship manager, like when you're building this in. I would recommend that that not be the ED, because the ED needs to be available, right? They need to be able to pick up this relationship in case there's a transition, and your ED is not. They should not be, jumping on every phone call. Yes, that is the goal so that, they transition out and the development team kind of holds this. So that would be my one flag here is that if your secondary relationship manager currently is your ED, maybe reconsider that, and figure out, who might be a third or something like that, because, that can also be tricky. Dharma, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I sort of talked about this before, but they had a very hard time filling the position I'm in now, and I think it just went on way longer than they expected. I think they were able, the ED, right, jumped in and did a lot of the work, which was not ideal because, right, she was essentially taking on a second job. So I think the idea of having a plan, um, because things happen, right? People have to move, life happens. So yeah, I appreciate all of these tips and ideas.
Kate asked in the question, should the ED be a primary relationship manager for anyone?
That's tricky, right? So the way I would really position an relationship building with your ED is that is just like a soft relationship, right? That's the ideal, is that your ED is holding more soft relationships. So you bring them in when you're like trying to close the gift to like finalize those conversations, but the nitty-gritty conversations is really being held with you or the in the role or is the responsibility of the development team. That's what I would say. Sometimes they are going to be that primary relationship because they just hold it and because that donor, that funder requires that. But as long as the ED is like filling in the blanks for staff of what is going on, you're doing regular check-ins, you're sitting in, in the corner of your ET's office while they're having that call on speaker and you're there knowing what's happening, it is okay for them to hold it. Because sometimes that's just necessary and that's just how some of these relationships are going to be. But the ideal there for an ED is that they hold some, what I call like a soft relationship. So they're the people that come on to really talk about the mission and the work and doing all that. But like moving forward in the process, that should stay with the development team and should be the responsibility of the development team so that there's a clear understanding of for the donor and the funder who to go to when I need something. If I need to talk about a grant agreement, grant responsibilities, any of that, we're speaking in the funder space right now. I'm going to go to the grants manager and we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about the objectives of this grant renewal that we're doing. But if I were to talk about programmatic stuff and like, I want to know what's happening here, or can we talk about expanding this program? I'm probably going to reach out to the ED instead. So does that make sense? Like talking about the soft relationship versus like I don't know, I don't want to call it a hard relationship because it shouldn't be a hard relationship. It should be easy. But that's the difference there. And that's what I would recommend be the ideal relationship type for an ED to do.
We got a question in the chat here. Looking for suggestions on how to convince fundraisers who seem to be on the verge of retiring but are resistant to sharing these relationships. I mean, suggestion number one, I would recommend sharing this recording with them and the and the information that we have shared with you today to give them a sense of why it is so important, things beyond your control. You just never know what's going to happen. And yeah, I would start with sharing this recording. Sabrina, do you have any other suggestions that they could help convince these people?
I would actually, start mapping out responsibilities if it's easier, right? Just, some of the resources that we're going to share with you are going to have that, but start mapping those out and really lay the picture for someone and be like, hey, I bought a lottery ticket yesterday. Fingers crossed. Here's my responsibilities that I hold. Do you know what happens, next month? The grant reporting. Do you know where to look? Do we know who holds these things? Really lay out that picture and the risk that it takes. And it is taking, sometimes going line by line, being like, I send out, 10 acknowledgement letters every week. This is how I do them. And then, mapping out that process, the acknowledgement letters. There's a 5-step process to that adding there. And it takes about, 5 hours a week. Janet is on this call and she does a wonderful job of like mapping out our tasks and how long they're going to take us to do that. She is a whiz and my life probably would be a lot more scattered if Janet wasn't here at PM, but she maps it out by hours to really like hone in how long, how much capacity the team actually does to do this work and how much it takes. It really is just kind of honing in that your team is a resource. We have limited capacity. And when that shrinks, how are we going to, disperse that work? And how do we, make the shocks a little bit less? So what I would do is I would start mapping out your roles, even on your team. Have your team like write everything they do down, not Doge style. We're not doing that here, but the responsibilities that they have, and an estimate of how long it takes them a week to do these things, or like, is this something that can be trained in an SOP or things like that, and then really start like adding these risk mitigating factors and having the discussion about what needs to happen just in case. I think when you outline it there and you put it on like it's visual for people, then they start responding to it. But it does take that like let's analyze our roles, and the uh, our roles and the capacities that we have internally, and start analyzing that. So if that's doable for you all, that's where I would start first.
A follow-on question here to begin the conversation, would it be the development director or the ED to initiate? This seems like a tough conversation to start.
I would start with the development director. I don't know, Lucy, what would you think? I would start with like the development director. Like if your team is built out, let's say like this is the ideal world, we have the development director plus they have a line of staff with them. So an individual giving person, a grants person, an associate, DevComs person, whatnot. I would start with the development director first and being like, I think we should outline our roles for capacity, right? And start seeing where that needs, and then that can level up because then the development director will have to reassess that map, and see, maybe they have a vantage point being like, ooh, this person holds a lot. Let's, start spreading those responsibilities around and start moving things around so that we can mitigate risk. And then you move it up. But I would start with the development director. Would you do anything different, Lucy?
No, I agree. Development director.
And even doing this stuff, like acknowledging one, like these resources and tools and like mapping out your responsibilities, that takes a lot of resources, right? You have donors to call, you have, direct email responses to draft and gets, automated. We know that. But it is worth taking the time to one, it also allows you a layout of like where your responsibilities are, and it's like a heat map, right? Like where are you holding a lot of your time and where can we spread these things, because we need to send a flag up that like, hey, like you all might have a good lay of the land with donor relationships, but do you know how to work the CRM? Do you know how to send an email from constant contact? I hold those. So we should be adding to that, a little bit so that, there's less of a burden on staff. Right now, we talk about staff burnout, in our industry is really high. So mitigating that as well. These are all really worth the investment and the time that you'll take to map these out, even at a high level. We really encourage you to do that.
Anyone else want to come off chat or off mute and ask a question? I'll drop it in the chat.
Yeah, Rose, if you want to share, you know, uh, your secret formula to getting your staff to stay for an
Hey, what
average
are
of
you
5 years.
doing?
I just work in an organization where like both of the major gifts, like main major gifts officers or like senior major gifts officers have been here for like many, many years. So I was like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, and I work more on institutional giving, so I'm not quite
Yeah.
as familiar with the like individual donor side, but yeah.
And do you guys have like these kinds of like mitigation plans? Like they're tenured. They're like, and they hold, especially major gift officers, the major gift officers. I'm sure they have deep relationships and like deep kind of roots into some of the procedures you guys have. I'm sorry I missed it if you put it in the chat earlier, but do you guys have plans around like if, one of the major gift officers decides to take a sabbatical to, Bali for 6 months?
Yeah, we don't. We don't. I
Okay.
think we really
Yeah.
need it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Had any of you like thought anything at all about contingency plans like this, whether or not you actually went through that? Had you even had these conversations or thoughts before about the necessity of it?
And it's almost like you don't really know you need it until you need it, right? You're in it. Because all of a sudden you're getting called by donors, in January being like, I need my tax receipt from last year. You never sent that to me. And you're like, oh, it's because my development associate, became a billionaire and is, off in Switzerland. I didn't know that. You, you don't know until you need it. So this is a really good safety net to start employing because it might not be something like Rose's organization. Those major gift officers seem to be set and they might not need it now because they might not need to think that they're leaving, but just in case to have it pulled out for longevity, for sustainability, you can be using it. And it could also be flipped too, so that you can consider these plans and look at them and be like, how can we scale up or how can we disperse the work? Because it is your heavy loading. Our favorite org that Lucy was talking about here, Unity Forever, they poor Karen, right? Look at all the work she's doing and front loading. So it is a good opportunity to reassess your risk management for your organization.
And one of the more surprising
Yes.
things that I learned during researching this topic was the necessity to have these plans, not just for these senior level roles, and just how important it is to also have these plans for the lower level roles, because I was a development associate at one time, you know what I mean? So I remember what it was like, being the only person who knew how to do those mail merges. I was the only person who knew how to do the social media. And I didn't think about it at the time, but like I say, when I was doing the research for this training and just realizing just how important every role is, everything all builds up to, everything all builds up together. So even the smaller roles, even the the development associate role needs to have this plan in place as just as importantly as the development director.
And just lifting up Feliza's comment of starting a documentation process. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. SOPs, guides on how to do things is so important. One, yes, for succession planning, but also as a check on you, right? Go back and check, like, actually, am I holding up to the standards that I've set for this system? Is also a good way to implement those documentation processes and keep going back to them. They serve as rules for succession and then also for gut checks. Like I said, to make sure that your systems are working the way you want them to work. And if they're not, let's go back and reassess that planning. But yes, documentation process. Oh my goodness, SOPs, guides, they are so, so, so helpful. And they help ease that transition, right? You got someone on, you finally hire that development associate, but now you need to train them, right? Think of how heavy that load of training and onboarding someone is. If you already have a documentation process, SOPs and guides and whatnot, it makes that a little bit easier to help them get the lay of the land and start understanding and fitting into your processes.
Yeah, good point, Kate. These documents really do need to be detailed for somebody who's never looked at these documents before to really be able to understand what's going on. I know in nonprofits we are terrible at using insider baseball and acronyms and all the rest of it for the SOPs and all this documentation. It needs to be just clearly laid out exactly what it is for a new person.
Can I shout out, and I'm going to in advance apologize for butchering your name, Anemike?
Oh my God,
Um,
you're so close. That's amazing. It's Anamika.
oh, good.
Yeah, well done.
Say it again.
Anamika.
Anemika. Who advocated for herself and got what she needed, what they needed, excuse me, I don't know your pronouns, to be successful and make sure that they didn't burn out. And like that is sometimes the hardest part, is getting your higher ups to listen to you. Oh, there you go, girl.
You did on that automatically.
So like that is amazing. I don't know if you want to talk more about how you A, recognize that that was a need within your organization, and B, was able to convince your leadership to be able to grant you the funds to expand your role so that you could be successful.
Sure. I mean, I guess for context, I'm now the VP of development at my organization. I started off as the grants manager almost 8 years ago now. So when I started, I had a team. I had one person at 30 hours a week and then one person at 20. And it just, we are primarily grant funded. So I had two grant writers, essentially like a little over a full-time person. And it was just so much that I was taking on a lot as well, because they just, and also because they were part-time. If I was the only one in the office on a Friday, so if a grant report is due on a Friday, then that's going to be me doing it. And so I think, I talked with my boss about it, and I think he was able to see that I was getting burned out. And also the person that I ended up hiring as the 20-hour-a-week person was amazing. And so it was really easy for me to make that argument that she should come on full time. And then when the person who was at 30 hours a week went to pursue another opportunity, I was able to argue that we should add 10 hours a week to that position as well, because we just had so many grants that we were managing. Yeah, and then so I guess that's how it was. I was able to, like, my boss saw how the stress was affecting me, and then he was able to advocate with the executive team that we should do that.
That's great. That's great. That's awesome.
And then COVID happened, so like it was pretty easy to make that argument that we're all burned out and going to leave if you don't do this. So
Yeah. And, taking a look at that, making sure that situation doesn't happen to, your staff now as the VP, maybe it's worth putting these in and like map and looking at where everything flows, right? Because we just, as you shared at the top of the training, average lifespan of, a development staff member is about 18 months, give or take, unless, we have those golden unicorns that stay for a very long time. But it's still a good check to be like, who holds what, and who is the backup for that, right? Things happen. Even if it's not leaving an organization, maybe their priorities need to shift because of the organizational priorities, right? Maybe you need to now focus on, increasing your institutional revenue line. So you need to go 80% of your time on that, and you have your tasks. Who's your backup person to, start carrying the individual relationships, carrying the major relationships, doing the department administration. So there's multiple reasons why putting these succession plans and kind of mapping them out is of a benefit to the organization.
yeah, for sure. I think something also that happened with us that is, I think, is pretty common in at least the nonprofits I've worked for, is that when I did get promoted, I continued doing my old job as well as the new one. And so now that we've like created this new position of VP of development, which is relatively new for me and completely new for the organization, I was like, y'all, I need a grants manager. Like I can't keep doing grants manager, director of development, and now all of the VP level stuff you want me to be doing. Like I cannot manage the day-to-day and also the big picture. Like I can't do all of it. And so we were able to, you know, promote one of our amazing grant writers to be the grants manager and then hire a new grant writer for her. So yeah, I'm working on building out a bigger team. But yes, this workshop has been really helpful because these are the arguments I'm trying to make as far as redundancies go, especially in a time like this when, you know, every dollar counts and
Mhm.
change is scary. So
Yeah, I see the question about what a heat map is, and just using the discussion that we're just in right now as an example. The heat map, so like who holds a lot of tasks, right? That person is going to have a hotter, heavier load. So there's that. Think of like think of a heat map. Think of like the bubbles and like who holds a lot. Whereas maybe you have a development associate that holds acknowledgement letters and gift processing. Heavy and important jobs, very heavy and important jobs, but they can take on a little bit more. Maybe their load is a little cooler to the touch. It's easier to handle. But someone who has a hotter workload, that's harder to handle and harder to approach and to get a hand on. So that's kind of what I mean by like a heat map. Who holds a hotter, warmer load? Who holds the colder, cooler loads? What loads are approachable? What loads might need, those like volcano level protection suits that they use to approach and to get a handle on.
So does everyone here have a good hold of where they can start now with the planning? Once we send out the tools, do you all feel like you have a good handle on how to begin this process? Is there anything that you can see is going to be a challenge for you right away? All right, well then my work is done, I guess. Well, we really hope that these tools they really are helpful to you. And I go back and watch this recording again if it helps you flick through the slides to see if this is helpful. And yeah, just go through all the different tools, take a look at them, see how you can adapt them to your organization and make them fit for your organization. Yeah, and get this redundancy going. And so you all can sleep slightly better at nighttime.
Thank you all.
Please be sure to fill out that survey again. Thank you, Janet, for posting that in there. All right, we'll see you again on our next Fundraising Friday. Thank you, everyone. Bye.